Good morning, everyone. My name is Johnston. I'm a director in our data analytics team and mainly focusing on the telecom space. For the last sort of 12 or 13 years, I've been helping companies sort of make better use of their data, be that through management or exploitation or even just securing it. And in that time, I guess I've seen quite a few differences and certainly differences in attitudes towards data as well. And we'll go into that in a wee bit of time as well. I'm also fortunate in that I have worked for a number of operators across the world, be that on large programs such as BSS transformation or HR transformation or finance. Similarly, more focused pieces of work, which were very data specific, i.e., helping them improve the data quality in an inventory, or actually helping understand what sort of organisation, to touch upon one of the points that Richard made, what sort of organisation do we need to have in place to actually exploit our data. And I think it's probably fair to say that throughout my experience, and certainly I've no doubt through everyone's experience here as well, that telecoms operators have got an awful lot of data, frankly. And the question posed was, are they sort of making as much use of it as they could be? And that's sort of one of the things we'll touch upon. And really what I thought I'd go into is, if they're not, then why not? So historically, what some of the challenges been around that? What are some of the opportunities that are out there for operators to make better use of their data, either externally or internally? And then finally, what are some of the threats out there? I guess we touched upon operators having an awful lot of data out there, and I think there is clearly a large demand for consumer data. You just need to look at some of the valuations of social media companies of late to understand that. And indeed, again, there's quite a nice comparison between telecom operators and social media companies. If you think back over the last 12 to 18 months or so, there have been some acquisitions whereby you've got social media companies being bought up for pretty large sums of money, whereby they've not got any real significant revenue, certainly profits sort of not been seen yet, and ultimately a pretty small business. On the other hand, in the telco space, you've seen operators being bought up with, these are operators that have been running for decades, with established revenues, with workforces of thousands, and with profits, and yet they are sort of going for similar sums. So you could, on that hand, argue, well, hang on a minute, if the operators were making better use of their data, would they have a higher valuation? But I think it's useful to sort of wind that back a little bit and think, well, actually, what are the purposes of the different organisations, right? And social media, that's all about broadcasting your opinion, isn't it? Or socialising with people. And generally speaking, it's a one-to-many experience. You post a picture, you post it up once rather than emailing it to a number of people. You can post it up once, and all the people that you want to see it can see it. Whereas if you think back to the telecoms world, traditionally that's been about connecting one person to another person through a voice call, then laterally, going into text messages, and then laterally connecting you to a web server ultimately. So there are different expectations that people have between their operator and a social media company. I think the other thing to think about also is that it's very different. If you want to tweet, for example, that's you're kind of in control of that. Hopefully you're not drunk when you're doing it, mind you, and that could be a different story. But by and large, it's your choice whether you tweet, and I think it's very different to making a phone call to someone and then that action being acted upon by others, whereby you've just not got the same control on that. Okay. So if we sort of move on to the slides. Okay, what are typical constraints that have been holding operators back? I've sort of put four up here, and I think that the first one, and it's interesting, Richard and I have spoken at length in the past about data being treated as a byproduct rather than sort of being treated as with this sort of as an enterprise asset, really. And if I think back when I started out, and I actually started out in industry with one of the operators here, and by and large, if we were putting in a new solution, let's say, I don't know, new CRM solution, the data didn't get a huge amount of attention, frankly. It was all about technology, what hardware we're going to put it on, what data centres are going to go in, what applications are going to be used, what functionality is it going to offer the business. But ultimately, and how long will it take to shift the data? That was kind of it, you know. So there wasn't a huge amount of thought around who actually owns this data, who's responsible for this data, what's the quality of this data, where's it actually coming from, what's the lineage of it, you know, so when actually someone sees it in an end report, can they trace it back and fully understand where it came from, what's the metadata around it. I'm sure you've all had experience of confusion caused in organisations, because actually this person over here has got a different definition of ARPU than this person over here, and that type of thing can take months to sort out. As a consequence of there not being as much focus on data, until I would say the last sort of 3 or 4 years really, what you will find is that data confusion is prevalent across a number of organisations. Now, if you don't actually understand what data you've got, you can't actually agree on what the definitions of it are, etc., then clearly it's going to be pretty hard to exploit it, right? You know, if you've got data sitting across, it's siloed, you've not got a single view of the customer, sorry, that's going to be a difficult situation to deal with. I think the other thing I was going to talk about was technology limitations as well, which is obviously very, very relevant to big data. And I think until recently, there's been a number of instances whereby operators have said, well, wouldn't it be great to do X, Y, or Z with our data? And if I think back to sort of 10, 12 years ago, I remember hypothesising about what a wonderful world it would be if we could harness all the CDRs. And by all the CDRs, really just the one that shows you the start of the call, the end of the call, where the cell ID was at the beginning, where the cell ID at the end was, and then who the call was made to. Now, bearing in mind, you know, there are sort of billions of these created a month, it was like, well, that will never happen, will it? Because we can't afford the storage, the processing power isn't there, etc., etc. And then lo and behold, 2-3 years later, we were able to hold 6 months worth of CDRs and start doing analysis on them. And now it's not so much CDRs that people are talking about, it's XDRs. So actually, what are the records in the background that actually go to make up that call, and can we harness them and then start getting insight off them, i.e. location based and such like. So that's come on a lot, and I guess a lot of the reasons behind the big data thing has been technology driven, i.e. you've now got the capability to harness large volumes of data that you maybe previously were throwing away, and actually for a lower cost you can bring them in and then see is there any value in it. I guess one of the questions that I've put up there actually is has actually this fully been overcome yet, however? I mean, I think we hear a lot about companies who have put in a Hadoop cluster here or Hadoop cluster there. But I think there's there's a lot more to it than just putting in that technical capability. And one of the side things, and we touched upon organisation earlier, is actually our organisations geared up to exploit it in the first place. So it's all well and good actually storing it, but do you have the right organisation in place? Do you have the right people in place? Do you have the right analytics capabilities as well over the top to actually get the insight from the data? Okay, marketplace consolidation as well, and I touched upon sort of companies merging and taking over each other, but often you'll find that that's not been fully addressed in the background. And by that, the results of that you can see are that you've got disparate billing systems, for example, or disparate CRM systems. And you call up a company, and then they need to understand who you are in order to point you towards the right CRM solution, because actually they've not been integrated yet. Similar with billing, I mean, I've come across operators with sort of between 10 and 20 different billing solutions. Again, if you're spreading your data out across so many different places, it's going to be difficult to harness the power of it and pull it into one place. And again, that results in inconsistencies and confusion. And then finally, privacy concerns, which is something that has been talked about for a fair bit this morning already. We every year we do a survey called Data Nation, and it's basically looking at the consumer's attitude to the collection and use of their data. What was really interesting was that this year, 35% of people felt that they knew what was going on with their data. They understood who was collecting it and what it was being used for. What staggered us really was that was 10% down on last year. Now, with all the sort of talk around big data and digital footprints increasing, etc., we were very surprised that wasn't higher, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail as well. So what are the opportunities? Well, I mentioned just there, digital footprints are increasing. People are doing more that is traceable in the digital world. Credit cards on the far right hand side are still dominating, but for example, social network accounts, nearly half of us have got that. Just can I do a straw poll? Who here is on a social network? Really? Not more? That's actually about 43%, I think. Just working it out quickly. I should say actually, I thought it was very appropriate to use some data when we were talking about a big data topic. I mean, maybe I could have based this on the film The Social Network or something like that if I'd tried. Although for me, maybe Braveheart would have been more appropriate, but it's got a very sad ending for me. Okay. And what about Twitter? So it's saying up here 9% of the people that we surveyed, this is a survey of around 2,000 people across the UK, 9% use Twitter. How many in here tweet? Were you guys in this survey, by the way? Because it does seem to be remarkable. Again, I was thinking that looks a bit low, but anyway, there we go. So bottom line is people are doing more online, and they're creating more of a digital footprint. In fact, I was thinking about myself this morning and what do I create sort of out with the typical activities that you might use a phone for, and I get on my bike in the morning to cycle into our office, which is just over there, and being a bit of a geek and keen to understand performance and such like, I put on my cycle monitor on my iPhone to see how quickly I cycle from my house into work. It can be slightly dangerous sometimes, right enough, if you're trying to beat a record. So I wouldn't always recommend it. So that is a footprint that someone's getting, right? They're understanding, how fast I'm going. They're understanding where I'm going. If I got the equipment, they can understand what my heartbeat was at the time, and that's all stored somewhere in the cloud. And I know that because I can get it on different phones. Similarly, when I get into work, I go and buy my breakfast, and then I religiously type in what I'm eating for my breakfast in order to try and monitor what I'm eating for the day, to try and hit below a certain calorie threshold, which, as you'll see, is not working all that well. But again, it's really interesting stuff, and you can start looking back at history, and I've no doubt that there's some correlation between your exercise, how much you're eating, similarly actually even how you're sleeping. Again, maybe I shouldn't be divulging this too much. It might even be worse than watching Top Gear. I've got an app that monitors how you sleep. Did anyone else use that? Right, there we go. So that is proper. It's properly down here. You can tell I didn't do this survey. But yeah, no, it actually monitors how you sleep, and it's a motion thing. So I think the correlation is if you roll over lots and such like, then you're not having such a good sleep. And this morning I was told I didn't have a very good sleep, which I could have told it as well, having young twins who are teething at the moment. But there we go. There we go. What's on this graphic down here? What's quite interesting is what we're calling the digital trails, i.e., when someone actually goes in and makes a footprint in the digital world. That's increasing, but the awareness, there's a correlation between the age of the respondents and the awareness. So basically what this is saying is the older you are, to a certain point, the grey one is 65 and over, I'm sure that was a coincidence, then actually you're becoming more aware of what data companies hold on you, and actually how they're using it. It's quite interesting because you would typically think that Generation Z, as we're calling it, so 15 to 17-year-olds, and Generation Y, so 18 to 34-year-olds, you would typically expect them to be more savvy, right? But actually what we're saying is that it's Generation X and the baby boomers that have got more understanding what's going on. But bottom line is that's all increasing, which is all good for companies in our sector.
What is a digital trail? How do you count it? What do you count as one?
So that's it's every time you make a digital mark, and that's on a per day basis.
On a per day basis.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So the other opportunity I think we spotted is that people are becoming more open to sharing their data. And as you can see here, 10% of people are happy with organisations sharing their data with other organisations. And it'd be interesting, I guess some of you in here will have good insight into, if you're working in industry, whether that's typical of your base of customers and how many people typically opt out versus and share their data. But this rises if you can, by 3% to 13%, it rises if customers think that actually the data is going to be used for their own benefit, right? So, if you start being targeted with things that actually, frankly, are interesting to you, then you're going to be more receptive to it. And I think that's a sort of real balancing point to get right. Interestingly enough, on the bottom part of the graphic, you see that 22% of people are happy to share with public bodies. So I guess that's the sort of the social good really, or the wider piece. And then 31% rises to 31% if it's going to be used for medical research. Which again, it just sort of shows that if people can see the benefit either for themselves or wider society, then they're going to be more willing to share. I've not yet offered up my sleeping patterns, but I'm sure there'll be a big demand for it at some point in the public for medical research. Okay, so touched upon customers being more receptive for tailored offers. What you can see here is the results from last year and then the results from this year, and across every sector, it's going up, which is very encouraging if that's what you're trying to achieve, frankly. The biggest jump was actually in Generation Y, so 18 to 34-year-olds. I mean, who? Again, I'm going to do another straw poll. Who here likes receiving tailored offers? I'm going to try and do some really quick calculations to work out which of these categories you're in, and then I'm not that quick. But no, I mean, I think the amount of people who I know who've gone online shopping and actually they like getting suggestions. And frankly, I think if our online supermarket didn't remember what we'd bought last week, goodness knows what we'd be eating next week, because it's really handy, that whole have you forgotten type thing. Oh yeah, we did actually forget milk. Quite a staple really. So bottom line is people are becoming more receptive to receiving that, and quite significantly as well. This piece is about transparency really and context. So if the customers understand what you're trying to do with the data and how it benefits them, then again they're going to be far more likely to share it. So, and not only that, they're going to be more confident in the company. So the stats here are pretty revealing actually. So if you tell your customer what you're doing with the data and what you hold, they're going to be 2 times more confident, so twice as confident that actually you'll keep the personal data safe. They're going to be twice as confident that you're going to be getting better offers. 3 times more confident that you wouldn't sell the data without their permission, and then also 3 times more confident that your personal details will be removed if required and asked to, going back to the anonymised point. So we talked about trust and transparency, but this is sort of showing people's attitudes towards it and what a big difference it can make. Okay, I guess some other opportunities that we see, and it would be great to sort of debate some of this stuff afterwards. M2M, that is going to be a massive data explosion. I think by 2019 we're all due to have, in the UK, we're all due to have our gas and electricity meters made smart. And what that will do is still sort of subject to conjecture, I guess. Who actually owns the data? Is it the power company? Is it the Is it the telecoms or network operator that sits between them all? But that will be, that will be fascinating to see. Bandwidth. So we're talking about data volumes exploding. In fact, I'm sure someone could probably tell me since I started talking how many peta or zettabytes have been generated in the world. I can't, I'm afraid. But bottom line is that data doesn't stay stationary, right? It's shared between networks. And how does it get between networks? Well, actually, you need big fat pipes, don't you, to move it places. So that clearly is an opportunity for operators. The more data you've got, the more you're going to have to move, and bandwidth will be required. Similarly, on LTE, what we're seeing talking to operators is that those who are offering LTE, they're seeing that their users are moving on to Wi-Fi less often, and that could well be because A, they're forgetful, or B, because actually the speeds that they're getting aren't inhibiting what they're trying to do. So from a mobile perspective, is that going to offer more opportunity to get more insight on your customers if they're not going off net? So that's just a few other thoughts really. Threats, so transparency being key, again from a Data Nation survey. There's a few things on here. So 39% of companies, 39% of respondents said that they were confident that personal data would be used to make better services. So that's an awful lot who haven't got confidence in that. I thought the next one was really worrying actually. 22%. So basically 22% being confident that their data is not being sold without their permission. Which, if you flip that, so 78% of people think that their data is being sold without their permission. Which clearly, if you're sort of in a data economy, as I'm sure a number of us are in, that's not a good stat. 38% think the data is kept safe. Only 20% believe that their identity will be removed when passing data to other organisations. Again, quite concerning. And only 24% believe that they're told how their personal data is used. So if you sort of cast your mind back to the correlation between trust and permission to use, and then you look at these stats, I think it's quite clear that there's quite a lot of work still to be done on that front. I guess some other thoughts. Data ownership. So I talked about the apps and using data and things like that, but who actually owns the data? I think that's quite a key one, and I think it's still something that's to be fully driven out. For example, is it the handset? Is it the network? Is it the OS manufacturer? Is it the app manufacturer? Who actually owns that data, and actually is everything that you're doing on your handset available to the operators to use and exploit? And I think the answer to that at the moment is probably no. Other industries, so we heard about, was it Barclays, he said? Got an example of using data, using customer data. All financial services companies have got an awful lot of data on you. They understand what you're purchasing if you're using your card, they make you, and where it is, etc. So they believe that they've got a lot of customer data that could be used as a sort of an additional business. I guess travel companies as well would fall into that category. If they understand where you're booking up things, where you're travelling to, etc., when you're travelling. And then the final thing is business models. So from an operator perspective, are they focused on becoming really efficient utilities, i.e. accepting that they are the connecting points between communications going on, or actually are they moving more in towards the content, which is where the value is? So I think that one's still to, and if you look at different operators, they've got different views on it at the moment. Okay. So to summarise, and I'm quite amazed actually. We've got to we're sort of 2 and a bit hours into a conference about big data, and no one's mentioned any V's. But I'm going to talk about C's instead. So I think that connectivity is clearly key, and I think that danger that that the core of what an operator needs to be and is forgotten about, and that is connecting people, and connecting people either together or connecting people to networks or whatever it is. So that has to be the core. Collaboration. So I talked previously about actually who owns the data, and in fact Richard touched upon the fact that they've collaborated with their product because they recognise that they don't actually have all the pieces, and I think we'll see that being more and more prevalent as time goes on. Context. What are people actually using the data for? Telling customers what they're using it for will be beneficial both to the organisation and the consumer. Choice. So actually giving people the choice about what they do with their data. I mean, I don't know if anyone signed up for a mobile contract recently, but generally speaking, they're about 2 years long now. If you're going postpaid, and I mean, I don't know, when I bought mine, I can't remember what box I ticked, frankly, to say whether I was opting in or opting out or whatever. But who knows, I might want to change my mind on that one. How I'd go about that, it'd be difficult to do. So I think giving more transparency, more choice to customers about how their data is used, who it's used with, etc. I mean, we saw the stat about if it was used in the public sector, they'd be more happy to share it, and ultimately building up that customer confidence. So making people understand what data they use and how it's being used, and giving them a say in that. And that's me.